Good morning, everybody. My name is Steph Karhoff. I'm a field specialist with OSU Extension. You can tell that I work in agriculture, not in IT, as I struggle with technology, especially this morning. Now I'm going to have even more problems now that I said that. So I wanted to start off the presentation with the most important slide, and that is thanking everybody that contributed to these trials, including our county educators that hosted trials, as well as our eFields partner farms, as well as Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins and Dr. Pierce Paul that worked together to get this protocol in place and get these trials up and going. So each year, growers battle disease and losses from those diseases. So this chart is taking data from the Crop Protection Network, which is a really great website if you haven't been to it before. I know it is a resource mentioned in yesterday's talks. So what this is showing is estimated crop losses in dollars per acre, and I have filtered, so it's for northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, and then starting in 2019 for Ohio tar spot. So you can see each year that loss from diseases ebbs and flows, but especially in 2021 where we have high disease pressures, we were seeing losses over $100 per acre. So that's prompting growers to look at different ways to manage those diseases, one of those being fungicide. So this comes from a survey that the Ag Crops team at Ohio State put out this last July. And it was surveying those that either directly manage or advise crop acres. So out of about 480 responses, about 2/3 of those were either consultants, farmers, or farm managers. And we asked them, what goes into your decision making when you're making that decision whether to use or not use a fungicide on your corn acres? So about 29% of those survey respondents said, I'm going to use fungicide on all of my corn acres every year. It makes my extension heart happy, though, that by and large, the biggest group were those that made that fungicide decision based on scouting that they did throughout the season. And then we also have those, about 25% will never use a fungicide, and then we had a smaller group that, they're going to wait for that commodity, that corn price to hit a certain limit before they're going to pull the trigger on that fungicide decision. So we're battling disease, we're looking for different options, and a newer product that's come out is this Xyway LFR technology. And so the active ingredient is Flutriafol, and what's really exciting about this active ingredient is that it's systemic, meaning that it can be taken up by the plant, applied at soil, taken up by the plant, and translocated throughout that entire plant. So two potential benefits of that could be, one, we can get some season-long protection, even though we're applying it at that beginning of the season. And then also, if you're looking at maybe going away from that late season foliar fungicide and in place using that Xyway, you're eliminating a pass through that field and the cost associated with taking that pass. So two potential benefits. The labeled diseases include most of our common foliar diseases, including gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight. We did do ratings as well for tar spot in this study too, even though it's not labeled currently with the product. So our overall study objective was to look at the yield response in corn with this application of Flutriafol. So we had 9 on-farm trials this past year in 2022. And each of those trials included an untreated control because that's how we learn what the benefit or maybe not the benefit of that treatment is, as well as one or more of the following treatments, that being the Xyway alone applied in a 2x2 manner, a foliar fungicide alone, and having that Xyway with a supplemental foliar fungicide application. So we had 9 trials that included that untreated versus Xyway and a lesser number with the foliar fungicides. So today I'm only going to make comparisons between that untreated and the Xyway alone, just because we don't have the numbers quite yet to start looking at, what's the benefit of maybe adding or stacking that fungicide pass to the Xyway, or comparing Xyway alone to that fungicide pass. So we had 7 counties participate in these on-farm trials for a total of 9. We had 2 trial locations in Wood County and Fulton County. And we had a nice spread all the way from Fulton County to Adams County on the western half of the state. And our 3 main data collection points for this protocol, first being a final stand count. All of the applications were in a 2x2. There were no in-furrow applications for these trials, but we still did final stand count, as well as disease severity as % of that leaf area that's covered by the pathogen. And we did that for 5 leaves in each plot at about dent stage for those trials. And we did ratings for northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, and tar spot. So I just wanted to take a minute to walk through those 3 diseases, and it's always a good refresher to remind ourselves what are we looking for during that growing season and what are other management strategies for those 3 diseases. So the first one being northern corn leaf blight. So when we're walking those fields, what we're going to be looking for are those longer lesions that almost look like a cigar. They may start off more of a greenish appearance and then transition into that more gray color. And this fungus can overwinter in the corn residue. So we can have pathogen inoculum building from that residue, but then we also have the other option of spores blowing in from other fields during wind and rain events, as well as that rain splashing up that inoculum that's in your residue and getting those lower leaves infected, and depending on what the weather is, letting that infection progress up the corn plant. So rain, dew, leaf wetness is going to favor disease development for northern corn leaf blight and a lot of these foliar diseases. And when we're thinking about management, we always want to be looking at multiple strategies. We've got some nice resistant hybrids for northern corn leaf blight. We can be thinking about crop rotation. How are we managing that residue, especially if you are using conservation tillage practices? And then fungicides as well to control northern corn leaf blight. Second being gray leaf spot. So what we're looking for this disease, you're going to see those smaller rectangles, and they're going to have that grayish appearance as well, starting at the lower part of the plant and working its way up as that disease progresses. This fungus also can overwinter in crop residue, so same with northern corn leaf blight. We've got 2 options for those spores making their way to the plant. The first one being in your residue, in your field, and splashing up with those raindrops, or when we have those heavy wind rain events coming in from that neighboring field. Management, same for northern corn leaf blight, looking at resistant hybrids, crop rotation, how are we managing that residue, and then fungicides. So a relatively newer disease for Ohio, starting probably a little bit more widespread in Ohio in 2019 is tar spot. So what you're looking for tar spot are small black raised spots. And I always like to call it the spit test. So if you're walking the fields and you see those small black dots, it's always helpful to, maybe spit or, get your finger wet and rub it on that leaf just to make sure that that black dot is embedded in that tissue surface and it's not, insect frass early on in the season that can get confused with tar spot. Or later on in the season, it's really easy to confuse tar spot with some of our rust diseases that can have those black teleospores. But the key difference when you're in late season is that these stroma of a tar spot are going to be embedded into that leaf surface, whereas that rust, it's going to be ruptured and those teleospores are going to be coming out. So humidity and leaf wetness so far seems to be favoring that disease development. As far as management strategies go, a lot of the seed companies that are evaluating their hybrids right now for tar spot resistance and breeding for it now that it's been out in the Corn Belt for a few years. So avoiding susceptible hybrids, working hand in hand with your dealer to making sure that you are selecting hybrids that have at least some level of resistance, whether that's broad spectrum or if they are aware of any vertical resistance, as well as same as always crop rotation, residue management, and some nice research is coming out from corn pathologists across the Midwest on what kind of fungicides work well with tar spot. So overall, in-season observations that we saw, no significant differences at any location were seen in final stand, so that Xyway treatment didn't have a negative impact on our final stand. Just a reminder, everything was delivered by 2x2, no in-furrow. Overall, there is low to moderate disease pressure, so the earliest diseases were observed in Adams County, like you would expect in southern Ohio, starting in early August. Working its way mid-August for some of those more central locations like Darke County, and then Fulton County, diseases not really being observed until September 1st. So overall, it seemed like we had disease, but at low, moderate levels, and that onset was shifted a little bit later compared to 2021. And that can make sense when we look at the weather data. So this is weather data collected from the Northwest Station up in Wood County in Custer, Ohio. So looking at 2022, and just for July and August, so when we're looking at this graph, those bars are showing us our rainfall events. And then the top line graph has our maximum temp, and then the lower line graph has our minimum temp. But I really want you to focus in on those rainfall events, especially looking at early July. So we did have, over 3 inches in July, but when we compare that to 2021, that distribution of that rainfall in 2021 was a little bit earlier in July, and that might be why we're seeing less disease earlier in the season in 2022. So looking at the location-specific results, when we look at one trial alone and making that comparison between the untreated control and the Xyway, we see significantly higher yield when we apply that statistics in 1 out of the 9 locations. So the second location in Wood County. But just numerically, it out-yielded in 7 out of the 9 locations. So if you're walking through that chart, we've got the different county locations, our 2 treatments, and then our moisture and yield. And you can find these results in the new eFields report. So this is available hard copy and also digital copy. So you can go to digitalag.osu.edu/efields to get the electronic version. We also have the Knowledge Exchange, which has a really nice feature where you can filter out different studies or counties and create a customized report for yourself to download as a PDF, which is a nice way to navigate that report as well. So if you're interested in looking at those trial, location-specific results, I'd direct you to that eFields report. But what we wanted to do was kind of combine all this data together to get a bigger picture. So if we combine all 9 trial locations, can we start asking questions on, what's that difference between the untreated and the Xyway? So we used a model to look at that data and take into account variation with that location, as well as those replications or blocking within location. And I just want to keep in mind that no model is perfect, and this is 1 season of data. So as we add more seasons of data to this model, we'll be able to ask more questions as well. So the next few slides have some box plots. So if you were here yesterday for Horacio's talk, he had a nice refresher when we're looking at these box plots, that the taller that box plot is, the more variation in those data points, and the shorter it is, the less variation. And that line in the middle of our box plot is going to be our median, and I've got the dot showing the average as well as the number attached to that average. So for these, yellow is untreated, and then that bluish color is going to be our Xyway treatment. So we didn't see any treatment effect on tar spot disease severity. Keep in mind, we saw low to moderate disease levels overall. Same for gray leaf spot. We didn't see a significant difference when we're looking at, across all those locations, differences between the untreated and that Xyway. But we did see a significant treatment effect for northern corn leaf blight, and that was, overall at those locations, the disease that most commonly was occurring in those fields was northern corn leaf blight. So we saw a slight dip in that disease severity, and just a reminder that disease severity is going to be the percent of that leaf covered by the pathogen. And then for yield, we did see a significant effect by that treatment. And compared to 211 bushel per acre with that untreated control with a 3 bushel increase with the Xyway. But I want to keep in mind, and the reason why I like showing those box plots is just to show that variation in the field data. And I've also got, it might be hard to see on the screen, but these colored dots corresponding with each of those box plots, that's an individual data point. And I always like to show that in a graph if I can, just a reminder that, I can find you an untreated plot that yielded high, and I can also find you a treated plot that yielded low. So we have lots of variation in that field data. But like I said, hopefully we can get more seasons of that data and be able to kind of tighten up that variation when we're asking these questions. So adding some numbers to this, making the cost assumption that we're working with about $6 corn, and maybe you're purchasing that Xyway product for about $20 per acre. So of course those prices can fluctuate, but just using those ballpark numbers, the untreated did just barely edge out that treated plot as a return over cost per acre. And that's really why I think we need to further this research and into some more higher disease pressure. That way we can start thinking about, okay, at what point is our disease high enough that we're decreasing that probability of having, the economic risk of purchasing that fungicide and not being able to pay it with the bushel increase that we're seeing. Also doing some more research in looking at that late season fungicide pass with the Xyway and alone, and seeing, in a high disease environment, does it pay to have that early season protection with a Xyway with a late season fungicide pass? Or are we better off, depending on the disease pressure, just having that Xyway stand alone and eliminating that pass later on through the field? So doing more work looking at that question. Overall though, across all of our locations, Xyway did have a significant effect on yield and northern corn leaf blight disease severity. But no effect on the gray leaf spot and tar spot. So I just wanted to end with, overall, we need to remember that we have multiple things in our IPM toolbox, is how Carl Bradley phrased it yesterday during his talk on fungicide resistance for frog eye leaf spot in soybean. So thinking, not just about that fungicide product, but what hybrid am I selecting? Prioritizing those resistant hybrids for our fields where we do have a higher history of foliar diseases and maybe higher residue, fields that we're going corn on corn, or where we have a no-till environment, prioritizing those resistant hybrids for those fields, as well as thinking about crop rotation. So I'll encourage you that if you're interested in evaluating a product like Xyway or another, or practice that you're interested on your operation, to engage with Extension, and we can work with you to get a replicated, randomized on-farm trial on your operation. That way you can have that individualized data to make those decisions. The eFields report is out, like I said. It's a hit even with the youngest generation of operators in our house. It pairs well with a goldfish snack after daycare in our household, thanks to all the tractor and combine photos. I'm a firm believer that you can only improve things that you measure. And so I would really appreciate, if you can get your phone out and you can scan this QR code. So I know everyone's got a phone for the most part in this day and age. So you can scan the QR code or go to go.osu.edu/CTC2023. So this is an evaluation of my teaching. So, if lunch was really awful yesterday, that's not for this survey. Just give me my evaluation of my teaching. It's really helpful for me to have that feedback as I present throughout the year, to go back and think about how I can better my teaching skills. It's also a great way, if you can't catch me today, to have a conversation. If you got ideas of trials that you would like to see or questions you would like us to explore, you can also drop that in the comment section in that survey. So with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions if there are any. Yes?
Does the sideway have to be put in a 2x2, or could we put in furrow in a totally tubular setup?
There is an in-furrow option. It seems like it's going away from that in-furrow option to 2x2 from what we saw. All of these trials use the 2x2 option, but there is an in-furrow. And that was, you left it in the tank for 2 to 3 days, and that was the in-furrow or the 2x2? Okay. Yeah, and we didn't see any stand count differences between our treated plots and untreated. So we didn't see any negative impact on stand from this product, which is always something to look at when you're using a product at planting. But it's good to see that others saw the same. Yeah, so looking at our data set, I can't answer that question, but that's a good question, thinking about different delivery mechanisms and whether you're still seeing that benefit. So I apologize, from this data, I can't say if that would have a negative impact or not, but that's something that we can explore in the future.
Did you look at any of crown rot or any of those diseases at all?
We didn't do crown rot. We only focused on the foliar diseases. What I would like to do with this project moving forward is, have some small plots, working with great people like Matt Davis up at Northwest, and add more measurements to it, looking at other diseases possibly, but also maybe some overall just like plant vigor, plant health measurements, thinking about, does our stalk strength or integrity increase with a product like this? Do we have greater stay green later in the season with a product like this? So I think there's a lot more that can be done here. But for these, we just did the 3 foliar disease ratings at about dent stage.
Microbes?
So for these, there weren't any biological products added. I will say, if you go to that 2022 eFields report, it wasn't included in these 9 on-farm trials, but Amanda Doritas in Madison County did have a trial that, not a biological, but looking at the nutrient side, it did have the Pivot Bio proven product as well as the Xyway. So it had multiple of those treatments. So that might be one example where you start thinking beyond the Xyway application, what other suite of nutrient or biological products can I stack on to get that plant where I want to be at the end of the season. But these did not.
You really didn't see any bench on meadow home?
Yeah, so I don't have any data, I guess, to back up the claim that spoon feeding that crop is going to put it in a healthier standpoint, to defend itself against that pathogen and that disease development. I think in general, making sure that our crop is off to a good start and having that fertility plan in place is always a good idea. That way we're not having a weakened crop that's more susceptible to that pathogen. As far as spoon feeding with that foliar feeding, I don't have any data to support that claim. But just in general, thinking about that disease triangle, so having a crop that's hopefully a resistant hybrid and has everything else in place as far as fertility plan, management practices, and then thinking about the environment we're putting that crop in, and then whether we have that inoculum or pathogen in the field itself.